Director of the Middle East Center at CSIS, and it's my honor to introduce Congressman Gary Ackerman, Democrat from the 5th District of New York and a member of Congress for 27 and a half years, but who's counting? Congressman Ackerman currently serves as chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on the Middle East and South Asia. In his years in Congress, he's built a distinguished record of accomplishment on a wide range of issues, from AIDS testing for infants to deep involvement in recent months on financial overhaul legislation and additional sanctions on Iran. Congressman Ackerman's compact district is a fascinating one. On the one hand, it encompasses much of Queens, a haven for immigrants for more than a century, now home to the largest of New York City's 3 Chinatowns. A third of his district is of Asian origin, while a quarter is Hispanic. His district also brings in some of the toniest suburbs of Long Island, including Great Neck and Sandy Point, which helped inspire the characters in The Great Gatsby. Congressman Ackerman has brought unity to this diversity through an approach that incorporates intelligence, honesty, and a wicked sense of humor. Upon being named chairman of his committee's Subcommittee on Asian and Pacific Affairs in 1993, the internet's a dangerous thing, he told the Los Angeles Times, "I love Asian food. Yesterday I had Japanese food for lunch in New York and Flushing, and then I came down here to Washington, I had Chinese food for dinner in Chinatown. So that's probably the overriding reason for becoming chairman." Lots of good restaurants. Congressman Ackerman got his professional start as a junior high school teacher in New York City, where he made history, winning a lawsuit allowing for parental leave after his daughter was born. He soon decided it was easier to start and run a community newspaper than teach adolescents, so he founded, edited, and published the Queens Tribune. A public servant since being elected to the New York State Senate in 1978, while in Washington he lives in a houseboat named the Unsinkable 2. Unsinkable 1, I'm sorry to say, sank. Those who've seen Congressman Ackerman in a hearing can attest that he's alert, feisty, and consistently thoughtful. Those of us in think tanks could learn something from that. So it's with special pleasure that I introduce to you Congressman Gary Ackerman.
Well, John, thank you very much for that introduction.
Gracious was written in the notes.
You read my notes, right? It sounds more interesting when you read it than when you live it. Well, thank you very much for inviting me here. It's truly a privilege, and I'm greatly humbled and honored to be at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. CSIS was born to leadership in international affairs, and this place represents what is best about American leadership abroad when it is done right. We find here policy that is thoughtful, nonpartisan, intellectually unafraid, genuinely knowledgeable, and capable of bringing together diverse points of view for frank argument, debate, and analysis of public policy and our shared values. As a member of the House of Representatives, obviously, this is a very strange and novel environment for me. But as your guest, I will do my best to make my remarks reflect the strange values of this place. As a representative of a country which daily buys millions of barrels of oil to make its economy operate and sells hundreds of billions of dollars in U.S. Treasury bonds to make its government operate, it may seem a bit risky to lecture others about burden sharing. But as someone who has recently thinned down considerably, I feel much better placed to attempt this undertaking than I might have 14 months and 50 pounds ago. How do I look? Simply marvelous. I'd like to start out by noting 2 analytical anomalies that reflect the challenge of cooperation between Washington and our partners in the Middle East, and then focus on 3 areas where our cooperation is much needed and where the dysfunctionality of our current relationships impede our efforts, and then conclude with some suggestions about what and can and should be done. 2 strange facts. In my experience, 2 strange facts stand out in political and especially security analysis of the Middle East. First, in a region with multiple ethnicities, religions, nationalities, and hundreds of years of roughly layered history, most of all that gets set aside. Among the Arab states, there are innumerable turf battles, grudges, personal animosities, historic betrayals. But in our relationship with the region and the way the region's politics are presented, the analytical landscape that appears in print or on TV is not one of amazing variety and detail, but quite the opposite. Conceptually, the washing away of detail and complexity starts with the easy agglomeration of the Arabs. The Salafist militant in the dusty village in Yemen, the apathetic, politically disengaged mother of 5 in the massive slums of Cairo, a chic 20-something living for the nightlife in Beirut, along with 300 million individuals, gets rhetorically tucked away and politically homogenized as the Arabs. As with any population of analytical interest, people do get bunched together for convenience, but unlike any other group that I know of, Arabs get further subsumed into the street. Regardless of wealth, urbanization, or any other distinguishing characteristics, collectively, opinion in the Arab world is referred to as the street, or among sophisticates, the Arab street. Everyone else in the world gets public opinion. Somehow, the Arabs wound up in the street. Why is this worth noting? Most importantly, because it is the warping lens through which Americans, and most especially American politicians, see a vital region of the world. The United States government has specific and varying bilateral relations with different Arab governments. As a member of Congress, my relationships are with individual leaders and officials, and through them with their governments. But the American political system as a whole aggregates its interlocutors. Instead of recognizing the special role that Jordan plays in intelligence, or that Egypt plays regarding Hamas, or that the UAE plays regarding trade with Iran, and so on, what we nonetheless usually get is the Arabs. And this conceptual aggregation of the Arabs is actually reinforced by the second strange dynamic of the Middle East political analysis, which is that, as a general rule, the leaders of these states usually say what they don't mean and mean what they don't say. Actually, they do say, but only in private. Like many others in Washington, and certainly in this room, I've been speaking with Arab leaders and diplomats and military chiefs for many years. I've seen some grow from young adults to mature leaders. Some I've seen grow from old men to very old men. They generally have 3 things in common, regardless of whether their economy is very friendly to the United States, sort of ambivalent, or openly hostile. They all speak differently in private than they do in public. They all pursue policies that their public would like to change if they could, and they all think the United States not only can, but should fix what concerns them. None of them, and in the 27-plus years that I've been in Congress, I've met quite a few of them, and their fathers too. None of them are actually worried about Israel starting a war with them. They worry about instability. They worry about provocations. They worry about the slowness of the peace process and the growth of settlements. They support and believe in a Palestinian state. They want Muslim interests in Jerusalem protected, and for the problems of the Palestinian refugees and the stateless to be honorably resolved. But do they worry about Israel attacking them? Do they obsess about Dimona? Do they feel an Israeli sword of Damocles over their heads? In my experience, not for a moment. While maintaining a strong public facade of rejection, the reality is that among the leaders I've come to know, they've not only accepted Israel as a reality, but implicitly as a valuable security partner. More than a few have told me that they would be delighted, first by a successful, and I emphasize successful, Israeli attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, and then they'd be delighted by the golden opportunity to denounce it. More than a few have bad-mouthed Palestinian leadership in ways that would make Ariel Sharon blush. More than a few have admitted that they were delighted to see Hezbollah and Hamas get smashed by the IDF, though they hastened to ask why America didn't stop the Israelis before the publicity went sour. In short, in thinking about the current partnership between the United States and our allies in the Middle East and the partnership we'd like to have, we should begin by facing some awkward facts. First, that these relationships, especially when removed from their specifics and subsumed within the Arabs, are dysfunctional, comporting to simple but misleading tropes. Second, within the particulars of each bilateral relationship, and especially in the undisclosed aspects, they are often very successful based on subtle balancing of needs and capabilities. Third, we should note that these successes have often been predicated on and sustained by a carefully calibrated ambiguity designed not just to avoid upsetting the Arab public opinion, but to avoid engaging it altogether. Finally, we should recognize that the cooperation between the United States and Arab nations is not predicated on shared political values or democratic norms. Put bluntly, we work together and have done so based upon deeply shared security interests, even if these interests are very rarely, if ever, discussed publicly. It is this fundamentally ambiguous to vaguely dishonest aspect that I mean to discuss, not because I yearn for the United States to be praised on Al Jazeera by the king or emir or president of wherever. My concern, bluntly, is that the way we've done business with the Arab states has limited the success of our shared policy efforts, that the old methods of hiding the truth from the public are not sustainable. In the interests of the Internet age especially, and now actually contribute to the instability. And that, as the principal security challenges we face together are fundamentally political, our successful response to them requires a new level of political engagement and cooperation that is incompatible with past practice. My three concerns. There are three outstanding security challenges which face the United States in the Middle East. Iran's drive toward a nuclear-powered hegemony, the destabilizing effect of the ongoing Arab-Israeli conflict, and the danger of mass casualty terrorism fueled by violent Islamic extremism. I would argue that there is not, in fact, any dispute between the U.S. government and the governments of most Arab states about this list. Some would be loath to list the Middle East and the peace process second rather than first. Some would prefer not to mention Iran by name. Some would prefer the neutral phrase violent extremism over anything specifying an Islamic component or using the word terrorism. Prefer being the key word. There is not, and actually for some years there has not been, in all of my experience, any real dispute that these are the three major challenges. First, Iran. That's my first. I'd like to discuss ways in which Iran has benefited from the current limits of our cooperation with the Arab world. The security dilemma posed by Iranian behavior should be considered in its parts, which are many. Most obvious, the most significant, is Tehran's drive to acquire a nuclear weapons capability, but the list doesn't stop there. It also includes political subversion in Arab states with Shiite populations, support for terrorist groups working against diplomatic efforts to resolve conflicts throughout the region, provision of money, arms, explosives and military training to unaccountable militias, violently opposing the established institutions in their societies, and following closely on the heels of Iran's nuclear ambitions, political efforts to intimidate, dominate the countries of the region. It's a pretty robust list of bad behavior, and little of it is questionable or ambiguous. And in response to these threats, the United States has done quite a lot. We've taken the lead in passing sanctions on Iran through the United Nations. We've passed new unilateral sanctions on our own. We've aggressively pressed our partners in Europe and in the Gulf for additional unilateral steps as well. We've gone around the world trying to chase off Iran's potential or actual business partners, and we've shared intelligence to try to close Iran's technology and their smuggling routes. We've sold billions of dollars of advanced weapons and training to allies and enhanced the capacity of American military facilities in the Middle East to cement our presence in the region and to reassure our allies. For the past 18 months, we've extended a hand to Iran to demonstrate that the political problem is in Tehran and not in Washington. And now, following the latest round of UN Security Council sanctions, the Obama administration has made clear its willingness to meet with the Iranians. Further, at least in part to address the concerns announced by Arab leaders, the Obama administration aggressively embraced the Middle East peace process from the outset, and at no small domestic political cost. Across the spectrum of diplomatic, political, and military options, the United States has been quite aggressive in trying to counter Iran. Personally, I think there's a lot more that could and should be done to increase the number of pressure points and the pressure being applied. In addition to stringent implementation of the recently passed Iran sanctions, both by the Congress and the Security Council, I would urge international focus on Iran's appalling human rights record. It's clearly illegal and destabilizing arming of Hezbollah and its dangerous, ambiguous relationship with al-Qaeda and the Taliban. In all of these cases, Iran could be made to choose from glowing global isolation and changes in its behavior demanded not just by the United States, but by the international community as a whole. The counter-Iran resume of our Arab partners, who frankly have quite a bit more at stake than do we, is not nearly so robust. Those flush with cash have bought arms. Some have played an important role in working for the latest round of UN sanctions and will take unilateral steps as well as make them effective. Lebanon, representing the Arab states, voted to abstain on the Security Council Resolution 1929, which, given the state of affairs in Lebanon, has to be seen as a very courageous decision by Prime Minister Hariri. But are our Arab partners integrating those new weapons with efforts to reform or improve existing political structures to build up some kind of collective defensive or to demonstrate collective will? Have they revamped their training and exercising routines with the United States or with each other to develop and demonstrate real military capacity? Is there a strong public position the Arabs have taken collectively regarding Iranian intrusion into Arab affairs? Have they unified to support Iraq, Lebanon, or the Palestinian Authority against Iranian subversion? Have they together highlighted Iran's numerous violations of the NPT and mandates from the UN Security Council? Has there been an Arab position taken on Iran's nuclear program as a threat to the region? Have they built new capacity to resist potential Iranian efforts to close the Straits of Hormuz? The answer to these questions suggests themselves. So what we have is limited but occasionally extremely useful cooperation. But in the end, the major diplomatic, security, and political costs are still left to the United States or to no one at all. It is often argued that Iran's foreign policy, save only where it concerns Israel and the United States, is a thoroughly pragmatic one, If that is so, one might expect to have seen real Iranian concern had any of the steps mentioned actually been taken. If the Gulf Cooperation Council was actually transforming itself into something more NATO-ish, if it was organizing military exercises and leading a productive dialogue about collective security, would Iran fail to take note? If redundant pipeline capacity to ship oil and gas from the Persian Gulf to the Red Sea or past the Straits of Hormuz were taking shape, would Tehran be indifferent? If the nation that was called out for singular attention at the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference and in the Non-Security Conference Council components at the United Nations was Iran and not Israel, would it really have had no effect on Iranian behavior? Second, the peace process. A similar picture can be painted regarding the Middle East peace process. The United States has taken the lead in supporting the leadership of President Abbas and Prime Minister Fayyad in the Palestinian Authority. We've helped create Palestinian security forces that are not only keeping the peace in Palestinian cities, but have helped to spark the sharp growth of the Palestinian economy. And the United States has pressed for and won a partial Israeli settlement freeze and pressed the two parties to return to negotiations. U.S. bilateral aid to the Palestinians in this fiscal year totals $500 million, including direct budget support for the PA, training Palestinian security forces, and USAID-controlled development assistance. And we've given UNRWA another $228 million as well. Again, our partners in the Arab world have contributed, often significantly, picking up the bulk of the cost of the PA's budget and blocking efforts by Iran and its allies to withdraw the Arab Peace Initiative. But where, might one ask, were the Arab confidence-building measures when President Obama was working hardest to win his Israeli settlement freeze? Where have been the Arab efforts to press Hamas to accept the Arab Peace Initiative and to make that acceptance a condition for reconciliation? Personally, I think Hamas should be compelled to accept the Quartet's conditions of recognition, nonviolence, and acceptance of prior agreements. But what I don't understand is why our Arab partners won't even attempt to make Hamas accept the shared Arab position. I don't want to suggest or imply that our Arab allies have done nothing. Their contributions have been important, and we'd be far worse off but for them. But the issue is whether collectively we could have done better, and whether we're doing well enough to protect and hopefully advance our shared interest in achieving peace. Certainly, I think we could all have made more of the opportunity presented by President Obama's early embrace of the peace process. If everyone had given more, I think we all would have gotten more. In a moment of truth instead of jumping in together, we had another round of "after you, my friend," which actually leaves people feeling less friendly. There is still no realistic or politically viable alternative for creating two states for two peoples. The last three Israeli prime ministers, all of whom, it is worth noting here, came out of the Likud, have recognized this fact. But there is still the rather sticky business of getting it done. And like anyone else who by interest or duty has been ensnared by this issue, I have a favorite theory for success. Curious?
The transcript will reflect a dramatic pause.
Write that in. I'm doing these new eye drops that are terrible. Consider the failed Camp David summit of 2000. Others with more expertise have detailed all the putative reasons why it shouldn't have happened the way that it did, and how absent this or that or the other thing, success was impossible. I'm not convinced. For me, the bottom line is that Barack made an offer and Arafat said no. Barack made a sweeter offer and Arafat, again, said no. I think that if Arafat had made his own offer and handed it to himself, Arafat would have still. You got it. I don't think the problem was really about the specific terms of the deal, and I'm not saying that they were irrelevant. But the failure at Camp David, in my view, was fundamentally about the never-to-come moment where Arafat would have had to step out on the stage with a smiling president of the United States and a smiling Israeli prime minister as the guy who just gave away all the Palestinian and Arab and Muslim equities so that he could be a president too. And he was not going to do that, not for anything. He wasn't going to do it unless all the other Arab kings and president and assorted poobahs were right there next to him to applaud his brilliant, unimaginable success in wringing from the iron grasp of the Israelis such an astonishing deal, even if it was the same exact deal, that beyond all hope and expectations fulfilled the Palestinian dream of statehood with honorable compromises. There's a reason our two political parties spent so much time and so many tens of millions of dollars on their national party conventions. There's a reason for the arenas and the confetti and the balloon drops. When you've got only one chance, one moment to transform a prosaic politician into a potential president, staging matters more than you think. So unless you believe there is absolutely no chance of Israeli and Palestinian leaders again finding themselves at a moment of truth, or you think in that moment Abu Mazen will need much less hand-holding than did Arafat, I think we and our friends in the Middle East need to start thinking staging. Staging in detail about how to avoid another breakdown like we had at Camp David 10 years ago. On a personal note, I just relish the notion of emirs in party hats and kings with kazoos and confetti and balloons raining down on them. Third, violent Islamic extremism. Confronting al-Qaeda and similar Salafist terrorist groups is actually the area in which our cooperation has been most public and, not surprisingly, the most effective. In some ways, it is a model for what we should be aiming at in other areas. In the years since 9/11, our Arab partners have made critical contributions to the global effort to destroy these groups, and the United States has helped facilitate domestic Arab efforts to improve their own homeland security, facility security, counterintelligence, counterterrorist intelligence, and anti-terrorist financing efforts. Arab leaders, individually and collectively, have been outspoken in their horror at al-Qaeda terrorism and the mass murder of innocents in the name of Islam. Following attacks on their own soil and discovery of their own immediate stake in defeating al-Qaeda and what it represents, the Arab states have been surprisingly agile and aggressive in meeting the challenge within their own borders. Small Arab military contingents are deployed in Afghanistan and have been for several years. The United States is cooperating politically and militarily with its Arab partners in fighting al-Qaeda in the Maghreb and on the Arabian Peninsula, in Yemen and in Iraq. But one area Where I would note where this particular cooperation has not been fully sufficient is with regard to private charities and donations that feed terrorist groups operating in the Middle East and well beyond it. And there's a simple reason for this gap. It lays squarely on the fault line in public opinion about what is and what is not terrorism. Here is where the divide becomes truly unbridgeable. Where the United States, I think rightly, judges terrorism based solely on behavior and deliberately disregards the cause allegedly justifying terrorism, this approach is not shared by our Arab partners. In this way, Hamas becomes an Islamic charity, and Pakistan's Lashkar-e-Taiba, the group of savages responsible for slaughtering 130 Indians and others in Mumbai, is considered a group of freedom fighters. Unfortunately, within many of our Arab allies, private financing of al-Qaeda or Salafist affiliate at home is not allowed, but at the same time, al-Qaeda or Salafist affiliates in Lima, Lahore, or London is a different story. While the Afghan and Pakistani Taliban are dependent on the drug trade for the bulk of their funds, they still are being financed in good measure by donations from individual Arab states, particularly those in the Gulf. The terrorist finance battle is not glamorous. No movies will be made about armies of accountants waging electronic warfare against terrorist balance sheets. But finance provides the sinews of war no less to al-Qaeda and other terrorists than it does to our own armed forces. While al-Qaeda is recognized by our Arab partners to be a shared threat and beyond the pale of acceptance, other radical, violent Islamic extremists still operate and benefit from their ability to function on the margins of tolerance. This marginal space needs to be closed for reasons both moral and pragmatic. One should not have to ask who the intended victims of a terrorist attack are to know that it is wrong. One shouldn't have to conduct a forensic audit to know that a group involved in both charity work and indiscriminate murder against civilians is really a terrorist group. Closing off the avenues of finance for terrorism means closing all these avenues for all terrorists, not just the ones targeting you. The international community has made very important progress in tackling terrorist finance since 2001, but there is still a great deal more to be done. And those additional steps will require a shift in thinking, public thinking, as much as changes in policy. Real success in cutting terrorists off cannot be had so long as there is held to be a good kind of terrorist. I will now attempt something that no smart politician, at least none of us who are interested in actually retiring, should try, least of all concerning the Middle East. I will nonetheless offer recommendations. 5 recommendations. And on the record, no less. Institutionalize. If there is a peculiarly American intervention in foreign affairs, it must be the establishment of international institutions. Whether the source of this tendency lies in our democratic values or a pragmatic recognition that international cooperation depends chiefly upon international participation in decision-making, the United States has been the world's institution builder par excellence. And I would argue that we have been abundantly rewarded for our belief and support for these institutions. None are without their flaws, some quite considerable. But life in a world without NATO, the World Bank, the IMF, and yes, the United Nations would be more dangerous, more unstable, more chaotic, more violent, given the destructive power availability of technology. Life would also be probably a lot shorter for many of us. In the light of the challenges I've mentioned, Iran, the peace process, and violent Islamic extremism, all of which require collective action to address effectively, I would contend that the Middle East is particularly in need of institutions. The United States cannot solve these problems without the Arab states. The Arab states cannot resolve these problems without the United States. I will not here propose the exact shape or size or membership requirements or any other details of the institution or institutions needed in the Middle East, but I will suggest a few simple thresholds to measure their potential utility. Is the United States a full participant? Are decisions binding on members? Are Iran and violent Islamic extremism clearly identified as collective concerns? In addressing Israeli-Palestinian issues, can it be acknowledged that this conflict is neither the alpha nor the omega of foreign policy concerns in the Middle East? If these tests can be met, I suspect we would likely be better off acknowledging that the Arab League and the GCC actually reveal the full measure of our partners' seriousness about collective security in the Middle East. Second suggestion, strategize. Another landmark of American diplomacy with strategic partners is the establishment of strategic dialogues. We conduct such discussions with allies around the globe, usually on an annual basis and typically at very senior levels. The purpose of these dialogues is threefold. A, to enhance the understanding and knowledge of the two sides regarding the strategic challenges they mutually and individually face. B, to develop shared policy frameworks in which to address those concerns. And C, to let others, particularly those responsible for the strategic challenges under discussion, to know that we're having those dialogues. It is time for such dialogues to begin in earnest in the Middle East. Whether they should take place through an institutional structure in ad hoc groups or bilaterally, I don't think needs to be decided now, and certainly not by me. The question is what structure would have the greatest benefit in terms of enhancing mutual strategic awareness, developing actionable policies, and putting others on notice. And here I'd refer back to the threshold questions that I mentioned for judging the utility of institutions. But these dialogues, regardless of form, can't seriously address the major issues in the region. We would be better off recognizing the limitations of our partners. Suggestion, exercise. There are several reasons Arab states want to buy American arms. Most obviously, they're excellent. They've proven to be reliable and effective, and often they're the best available. Also, they bring along with them special relationships with the American military and the potential for interoperability. And finally, arms sales, especially for the United States, are the physical manifestation of an implicit political security relationship. I suggest that we've gone as far as we can go depending on these implied relationships. In many cases, we find the implied leverage works in the opposite way than we've supposed. In others, the purchase of arms produces diminished rather than heightened military readiness. Too many clients see the procurement of American arms as the end rather than the beginning of their defense responsibilities. My suggestion is that the United States begin conditioning arms sales on two additional factors. First, the receipt of a commitment and related plans from the buyer to sustain the systems they buy, including not just spares and related logistics, but realistic training as well. Second, we should consider insisting on a program of exercises with the United States that will demonstrate the capacity of these systems acquired and reveal the shortcomings that are needed to be improved. We cannot continue to sell arms that serve as no more than lawn ornaments if we really believe there are security challenges these arms are intended to address. Suggestion, evangelize. The word evangelize is a dangerous one to use in the context of the Middle East, but I think here it's one that fits. The ideas that I would propose sharing are not the gospel of any religion, but beliefs regarding human, political, and civil rights that have been accepted as universal. As a component of a strategy to bring the United States and the Arab states close together, this element may strike some as incongruous. Historically, the issue of human rights has either been ignored by the United States in its relation with Arab states or briefly used as a truncheon with little obvious benefit. I believe there is a middle ground on the high road. President Obama's speech in Cairo is worth quoting. He said, "America does not presume to know what is best for everyone, just as we would not presume to pick the outcome of a peaceful election. But I do have an unyielding belief that all people yearn for certain things: the ability to speak your mind and have a say in how you are governed, confidence in the rule of law and the equal administration of justice, government that is transparent and doesn't steal from the people, the freedom to live as you choose. These are not just American ideas, they are human rights, and this is why we will support them everywhere." So said our American president. Just as we expect Arab leaders to rise to the challenge of speaking about truth where the strategic challenges facing their nations do and do not come from, we too need to rise to the challenge of speaking the truth about human rights, even when the price is discomfort and even some discord. Strategic partners do not agree on every point, and a partnership based on suppressing fundamental beliefs is unlikely to endure. More prudently, I consider it more likely that American efforts to raise these issues will enhance, not reduce, our diplomatic leverage, that it will enhance, not reduce, our credibility with Arab public opinion, and that it will enhance, not reduce, our ability to sustain a policy of heightened partnership with the Arab states. And on top of that, we won't have to feel like cheap hypocrites to boot. Suggestion: publicize. One final recommendation that I'd like to make, and I believe it's the most important in the sense that it's the foundation on which the others will come to rest. If we are to embark on a new era of U.S.-Arab cooperation in addressing the security challenges in the Middle East, we cannot do it in secret. Our new policy must be aggressively explained and defended, not just here, but among our partners in the Middle East. Although I focused on foreign policy during much of my time in Congress, my professional background is that of a public school teacher and the publisher of a community newspaper. From both positions, I learned a lot, but nothing more important than these two truths. Nothing explains itself, and nothing sells itself. If we and our Arab partners are going to be allies in the struggle against Iranian hegemony and nuclear proliferation, and I think we should be, that has to be explained to the public both here and there. If the challenge of making peace between Israelis and Palestinians depends upon a regional embrace of not just a two-state solution, but of the actual two states, then we cannot wait for the solution to arrive while we sleep. If the threat posed by madman publicly planning mass slaughter in the name of God threatens us all, and without question it does, then our response must be equally global and equally explicit. In concluding, let me say we can meet these challenges, and I have no doubt of that. Iran is not a superpower, and its acquisition of nuclear arms is far from a certainty. Israel and Palestine can exist in peace and security. Anyone who has gotten lost in the swirl and bustle of Jerusalem's old city knows that coexistence is possible. Anyone not utterly without hope can see that al-Qaeda's promise of a glorious return to the 12th century is not the future of civilization. These are serious challenges both to the United States and the states of the Middle East. Serious, yes, but not impossible. Not if we can, in the face of criticism and carping, keep our minds fixed on the gravity of the problems and find a new model of cooperation, of sharing a burden that is too heavy for each of us alone to bear. Together, I think, together I know it can be done. Thank you.